In this game, Leonid Stein defeated the world champion Vasily Smyslov by violating the opening principles. Stein demonstrated an original way of playing chess and carried out a revolutionary idea. Instead of developing his pieces in the opening, he moved his h-pawn first to h4, then to h5 and eventually to h6. Smyslov reacted in the most natural way by attacking his opponent's center, but Stein's pressure was too strong and Smyslov's position collapsed. Stein played the English opening, c4. Smyslov played knight f6, knight c3, e6, knight f3, b6, preparing the fianchetto of the bishop. e4, bishop b7, now both the knight and the bishop are attacking the pawn, and Stein starts his original play right on move 5. Instead of common d3, which would have defended the pawn, or the advance of the pawn to e5, Stein plays queen e2, defending the pawn with the queen. At first sight, this move doesn't make any sense, because the queen on e2 is closing the bishop's diagonal, and the development of the king side would be problematic. But Stein had his point. He wanted to play d4 instead of d3, completely occupying the center with his pawns. Besides that, queen e2 prevents black from playing d5, because white would simply capture on d5 with the e-pawn, and black wouldn't be able to recapture with the pawn, because it would have been pinned. Smyslov plays bishop b4, attacking the knight, which is defending the pawn, so he has created an immediate threat. Bishop takes c3, followed by knight takes e4, of course. That's why Stein doesn't have time to play d4 anymore, and instead he plays e5, attacking the knight. The knight must retreat to g8, but it will come back into play through e7. And now, of course, d4 followed. Smyslov immediately attacks the center, d6. Stein plays a3, and the exchange on c3 takes place. Now Stein has the advantage of two bishops, but his pawn structure is damaged. The knight comes back into play, knight e7, and we have reached the critical position. At first sight, white must think about the development, because the king is still in the center, and the king side isn't developed, and the queen side isn't developed either. However, instead of the development, Stein played h4, a fantastic move. At first sight, this move looks like a move made by a beginner who knows nothing about the opening principles. However, if we look deeper into the position, we will see that black actually has the same problems. Black king is also in the center, and black pieces aren't developed either. And Stein's idea is to start the attack on the king side, while black king is still in the center and the development isn't finished. So, by moving his pawn further, Stein wants to weaken the dark squares on black's king side, after which the defense of the dark squares would be problematic, because black doesn't have the dark squared bishop anymore, while white has the dark squared bishop, which will attack those squares. Besides that, by playing h5, h6, Stein wants to grab more space on the king side and also open up the position for his bishop pair. Smyslov played in the most natural way, knight d7, attacking the center, so he has created an immediate threat, namely the elimination of the defender of the center, namely the knight on f3, which is defending the pawns, and after that white would be forced to either capture with the pawn, after which the pawn structure on the king side would be demolished, or if white captures with the queen, then the pawn on e5 would fall. Black would simply capture with the pawn, and after d takes e, the knight on d7 will jump to e5 and black would be a pawn up. However, Stein completely ignores this threat. He creates his own threats, h5. And now Smyslov made a serious mistake. It was necessary to stop this pawn by playing h6. In this case, white would have had the advantage too after bishop f4, but that would have been a slight advantage. Instead of this, however, it seems that Smyslov wanted to punish Stein for this kind of play, and he plays very straightforwardly. He eliminates the defender of the center, and Stein captures with the queen, and now, as you see, the pawn is unguarded. It's defended only once, while it's attacked 2 times, and Smyslov destroys Stein's pawn center. So Smyslov plays in accordance with the classic principles. One should respond to the flank attack with the attack of the center. And Smyslov, of course, captures on e5. And Stein continues his pawn march, h6. And now we can see that the dark squares on black's king side would be weakened inevitably. In case black plays g6, then simply d takes e. As you see, the dark squares are weakened, and it turns out that black cannot capture the pawn because of queen f6 with the double attack. That's why Smyslov played g takes h instead. However, it isn't better because the dark squares are still weakened. And Stein simply captures on h6. And Smyslov continues the destruction of the white's pawn center. E takes d. Stein plays bishop g7, attacking the rook and forcing it to move to g8, after which the pawn on h7 is unguarded. And of course, rook takes h7 followed. Smyslov plays knight f5, attacking the bishop. It's attacked 2 times now. And bishop takes d4. Of course, black cannot capture the bishop. That would have been a terrible blunder because of checkmate in one move. And that's why Smyslov plays c5, attacking the bishop. And Stein continues his bold play. Instead of retreating the bishop, he attacks the knight, g4. In case the knight retreats, for example, to d6, in order to defend the pawn against the checkmate, then simply bishop h8 would have been possible. And it turns out that black simply cannot move. The knight cannot move because of the checkmate. On f7, it must defend f7. The second knight simply doesn't have any squares because both f6 and e5 are under the white bishop's control. The queen cannot move because it must defend the rook, which is attacked by the white queen, and white is threatening terrible rook d1 with the terrible pressure on the d file and attacking the knight on d6, which is defending f7. That's why after g4, Smyslov captures the bishop. C takes d, and after the elimination of this bishop, the weakening of the dark squares isn't that dangerous anymore. However, Stein captures the knight. Smyslov wants to keep the position closed as his king is in the center and plays e5. And while black has defended the dark squares, now Stein starts the attack on the light squares, because black doesn't have the light squared bishop either to defend the weaknesses on the light squares, because black has exchanged the light squared bishop on f3 for the white knight, and Stein made another strong move, queen d5, creating again terrible threats, checkmate in 1 on f7. Of course, black cannot defend f7 with the queen, because the queen must keep an eye on the rook, which is attacked by the queen. That's why Smyslov must move his rook, which is placed on the open file, to a passive square, rook f8. Now Stein captures on d4, and Smyslov finally moves the rook from a8, rook c8. Now the rook isn't attacked anymore, and that means that the black queen is free to move. And the rook also is attacking the pawn, of course. And also, that's a kind of prophylactic move, because white cannot capture on e5 anymore, because of rook c5 attacking the queen, and also the e5 pawn would fall in this case. And of course, instead of d takes e, Stein made a much stronger move, rook d1, developing his rook, which wasn't doing anything on a1, and on d1 it exerts very unpleasant pressure on the d file. Now that the rook moved away from a8, and the queen is free, black played queen e7, creating a threat. E takes d with the check, creating a very unpleasant x-ray. But Stein made a strong move, bishop g2, vacating the f1 square for the king. And in case black captures on d4 with check, white would simply play king f1 with a terrible threat. The e1 square is vacated for the rook, and rook e1 will come with great effect as both the king and the queen are placed on the e-file. That's why after bishop g2, Smyslov played rook g8. as the queen is defending the f7, the rook can move to g8 to a more active square, attacking the bishop. Of course, the bishop is defended by the queen, but now the queen must keep an eye on the bishop. And, of course, also vacating the f8 square for his king, because the black king isn't safe either. The e-file, the center, can open at any moment. And Stein made another strong move. Queen b7, attacking the rook and leaving the c4 pawn unguarded. And Smyslov captured on c4, of course. And now d takes e. Now the d-file is open and the rook has become even stronger. Smyslov captures on e5, check, king f1, of course a terrible rook e1 is threatened, that's why Smyslov played queen b5, creating a terrible threat. So there is an x-ray, so the rook can move away with the discovered check. That's why Stein played king g1, moving away from the x-ray. However, on g1 the king is right under the attack of the rook, and the bishop on g2 is pinned now. So what to do now? White is threatening deadly queen a8 check, followed by queen takes g8, of course. In case black plays rook g4, which at first sight looks like very dangerous, creating a terrible threat, on g2, black is losing on the spot. After queen c8 check, king e7, and a simple combination rook takes d7 check, queen takes d7, and rook takes f7 check. The king must capture, queen takes d7 check, and after king f8, of course, the bishop on g2 is doomed. However, after f6, it turns out that white is winning. Black can capture the bishop, but then the terrible threats would be impossible to defend against. Or probably instead of rook g4, it would have been better to sacrifice the exchange on g2. And after king takes g2, queen takes f5. White, of course, is better. White is an exchange up. However, black king isn't safe either. Black king isn't safe, but white king isn't safe either. So black would have had some counter chances. Black would be able to continue the resistance probably. Instead of this, instead of rook takes g2, however, Smyslov played queen c6 in order to take under control the a8 square. Now there are no checks on the back rank. The a8 is controlled by the queen, the b8 is controlled by the knight, and c8, of course, is also under black's control. And, of course, white cannot capture the queen with the bishop, because the bishop is pinned. However, it turns out that queen c6 is a losing move, and Stein can win on the spot. First, he captured on c6, and after rook takes c6, he found a brilliant move. I will give you a small tip before pausing the video. So, at the moment, white, of course, cannot capture the rook, because the bishop is pinned. So, taking that into consideration, you can try to find Stein's brilliant move. So, he plays rook h8 in order to deflect the rook from the g-file. In case black captures the rook, then simply now the bishop is unpinned and bishop takes c6, and it turns out that the knight on d7 is pinned and it's attacked 2 times and there is no defense, and white would be simply a piece up. That's why after rook h8, instead of capturing the rook, Smyslov played rook g6, moving away the rook from c6, however putting it right under the pawn's attack, and of course Stein captured it, and after rook takes h8, bishop c6 followed, and the same position emerged. Now the knight will fall, of course. And after rook g8, bishop takes d7 check, king e7, bishop f5, f takes g, rook d7 check, king f6, bishop d3 and rook a8. Without waiting for Stein's move, Smyslov resigned. And now I recommend watching another beautiful game by Stein, in which he demonstrated a very deep understanding of chess. But first, like this video and subscribe, as it's really helpful for the channel growth.